Hey, deserving listeners, I want to talk about hubris, specifically my hubris. Something happened recently that reminded me of my hubris and my overconfidence. But first, let's define hubris. I like a good definition. One way of defining it is that hubris is having excessive confidence and arrogance, often leading to one's downfall. So, too confident, possibly arrogant, leading to actions taken by the person with too much confidence that leads to negative consequences for that individual. And we can't talk about hubris without talking about Icarus from Greek mythology. The story goes that Icarus and his father, Daedalus, were imprisoned by a king, and Daedalus and Icarus wanted to escape the prison, and since Daedalus was a master craftsman, in prison, Daedalus made wings for him and his son out of the feathers that birds had shed from molting, I believe. He also got the threads from the blankets from their bed. He also used the leather straps from their sandals, and he managed to get his hands on some beeswax. There were bees around, and he used these materials to make wings for him and his son. Before flying away from the prison, Daedalus warned his son Icarus not to fly too low, or else the water from the sea, the mist from the sea, would soak the feathers and cause the wings to fall apart or fail. Daedalus also told Icarus not to fly too high, to not fly too close to the sun, or the heat would melt the wax, causing the feathers to fall out and Icarus to fall from the sky. So Icarus and Daedalus flew from the prison. Everything was going well. Icarus got overly confident. He had hubris. He decided to have some fun. He flew too close to the sun. The wax melted and he fell and died. Well, I had my Icarus moment last week. So let me give some background. It was a family reunion of sorts for 9-10 days. My family were all going to get together, my parents and my siblings and all the grandkids. And it was the first day that we were all together. And we rented a bunch of electric bikes. And we were riding on this really wonderful trail in Bellingham, if you're familiar. I don't know what the trail is called, but it goes by the waterfall, and I associate it with Alabama Hill. Anyway, it's a lovely day, sun streaming through the trees, and everyone's having a good time. And I haven't ridden a bike much since my childhood. I rode a bike a little bit in my 20s, but, it's like the saying goes that it's like riding a bike, and it was. I jump on this electric bike, and I seem to be doing just fine. And I found myself taking a fair amount of risks, not like terrible risks, but a fair amount of risks, and saying, okay, hey, at 53 years old, and I haven't ridden a bike a long time, I still kind of have it. I'm not out of the game yet. After riding on the trail for quite some time, we came upon what I guess I'll call a BMX track, like a dirt track with jumps and other kinds of obstacles. A BMX track might be a little grandiose of a term. I think other people might call it like a kiddie pump track, if you know. It sort of seemed in between that, where someone that wanted to do some serious BMXing might have a little bit of fun, but young kids could also manage. So my family, some of them head into this, and they're not, going ham on these things. They're just casually going, oh, there's a little bit of a loop-de-loo here, and, they're stopping and going, oh, let's go off this little thing. Well, I'm heading into the track, and I don't stop for anything. I'm thinking, I don't need to be cautious. I'm feeling confident. I have hubris. And I start going off some jumps, and I find myself on this plateau thing. It's sort of up higher than everything else. And this is from my memory. It could be a little wrong, but at the very least, I definitely remember that I suddenly found myself on the edge of a velodrome. If you're familiar with a velodrome, that's like where bicycle races are on a track, right? Well, on the turns, everything has to be curved, right? It has to be on a slope to absorb the forces so that the cars or the bikes don't go flying. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I'm on the edge of a little velodrome going the wrong direction. And I had this split-second decision to make to try to either stop by slamming on the brakes or to push through, to actually speed up, to get up to speed so I could, I don't know, maybe turn and get into the berm, if that makes any sense. It's hard to describe this. But it happened so fast, but it was because I just went headlong into this BMX pump track thing, and I didn't know what was over the hill. I just went, and I couldn't stop. And I went off what you could call like a mini cliff, essentially. And I hit my front wheel on, it went off this little cliff. So I'm vertical, right? My wheels are pointed straight towards the earth, and I land on that front wheel. My body continues forward, and I slam my chest into the handlebars, and I go over the handlebars, and I pogo on my head, and I continue to flip. And it was okay. So tangent. There's a number of tangents that I'm going to go on in the story to give some context. So I've had a lot of head injuries in my life. I've talked about them to some extent on this podcast, like when I interviewed my family members on the podcast. I think we talked about at least some of them. It's a bit of a joke in my family about how much I landed on my head. In fact, earlier that day or the day before, my mom is saying, "Oh, Kirk, I remember another time that you landed on your head." We can add this to the canon of your head injuries. You were probably 2 or 3 years old, and you're sitting on a picnic bench having lunch at Auntie Carol's house, and you just fell backwards and landed on the concrete hard. And I thought, oh yeah, I kind of remember that one, or I remember hearing about that one. So it's a bit of a joke. I've had lots of concussions, so I have a lot of experiences to compare and contrast, different head injuries, different concussions. And when I pogoed off of my head, I instantly was reminded of a time that felt very similar when I was playing football in high school. I was a running back, and I was going right up the middle, and I broke through the line, and I saw, as I break through all the bodies of the line, I see 2 of the biggest, meanest linebackers waiting to smash me. I just remember breaking through the line like, yay, I've broken through. And I think, oh no, they just teed off on me. And I remember I just put my head down, hope for the best, and they hit me so hard. And I remember, playing football is a fairly painful experience frequently, but there are moments where you think, oh my God, that was a lot more pain than normal. And this was one of those, maybe the most pain I'd ever felt. And they just smashed me. And the thing that I remember feeling was how my spine was compressing, and how they had both just teed off on my head, I think. It's hard to know exactly what happened from my perspective, but that's what it felt like. And as I was walking back to the huddle, I remember I was so dizzy and concussed that I couldn't walk straight, and I was veering off to the right as I was trying to get back to the huddle. And, it's the 80s, so they didn't have concussion protocols. You just, quote unquote, walked it off, and I just continued playing. And I guess everything turned out okay. I don't know. So when I pogoed off my head, after crashing on the bike, I remember thinking it felt similar to that, but actually it felt worse than that. I remember thinking, I don't know if I've ever landed on my head or if I've ever had a spine compression or if I've ever hit my head quite as hard as this. This is all happening, these thoughts are happening in a split second as I'm pogoing off of my head. And, if you've had head injuries of various kinds, you know that they all have their different flavors, right? Like when I was a young child, we would get bored. I remember one way we would pass the time when our moms would take us shopping to the mall, and we would just be sitting in the department store bored out of our minds, and we would play this game where we would smash our heads into each other like a game of chicken. And I remember the feeling, that burning feeling of concussion that your brain and head kind of goes through as you smash your head into, or you have someone else smash their head into yours and you see stars. It was a different time in the 70s. But that's a different feeling than pogoing off your head. Again, the closest I had were these two linebackers who must have just as I put my head down and I'm running full bore, they must have ran full bore just straight into my head and shoulders maybe. It's also a different feeling to be punched in the face or to be hit in the face or the head with a baseball or something. Each one has its own feel to it. And this one felt like, pogoing off your head. like from the height of, 4 or 5 feet, just dropping straight down on your head without having time to put your arms out in front of you, which I don't think happened. I mean, I have all these like mystery injuries on my wrists and hands. Like there's a fair amount of blood from something on a knuckle. So I don't know how and when that happened. So maybe I had my arms out, sort of. I don't know. So because it felt harder and harsher than any other spine compression or head injury that I'd ever had of that sort, I immediately figured that I had broken my back or my neck or split my head open or something. It just felt like there's no way that I'm going to get out of this without some major consequence to this. And, I did have a helmet on, but let me go on a tangent about my helmet. I don't know if I've talked about this before on the podcast, but 99.9% of headgear or even glasses, like, prescription glasses, they don't fit on my head. I must have a gigantic noggin. I don't think of my head as abnormal, though, but apparently it is. When I was a kid in high school, they had to have a special helmet made for me. There was another guy that also had a head as big as me as well, so it wasn't like I was the only one. As someone that likes hats, I'll say, oh, that looks like a cool hat, put it on my head. No. And I'm not talking like it's a snug fit. I'm telling you, it doesn't even fit around my skull. It sits on top of my head comically, like a costume that you would wear with a comically small hat. It doesn't even come close. Glasses. I recently had to get some prescription glasses, and not a single pair of glasses out of, I'm guessing, hundreds available fit on my head or looked right. I looked like I was an adult wearing children's glasses. So I actually, throughout my life, because I've worn glasses my whole life pretty much, I usually have to buy sunglasses and use those as frames, because sunglasses, for whatever reason, are a lot bigger in terms of the form factor, and that's ultimately what I did. It's not the end of the world, but it gets annoying. And I don't know if it has to do with some kind of erasure of Asian Americans, because Asian Americans often have bigger heads. There's a lot of women Asian Americans that I know that they don't look like they have giant heads, but they have to look far and wide to find glasses that will fit, that kind of thing. So when we rented the bikes, it came with helmets. I rented a bunch of bikes all at once, and they all came with the helmets all at once. And so we were all going through the helmets, choosing one. And I figured that none of the helmets would fit my head, and I figured I just wouldn't wear a helmet because I never wore a helmet. Well, really, almost, of all the times that I have ridden a bike throughout my life, I think there was only one time when I wore a helmet. I was really close to just not wearing one because I'm thinking, why would I need a helmet? I'm not going to crash. Hubris. But one did manage to fit on my head, but the strap wouldn't fit around my chin. I could kind of smash it onto my skull, but the strap, no matter how much I loosened it, would not fit around. It wasn't even close to fitting under my chin. So it was just sitting there on the top of my head. So when I crashed and I landed on my head and I pogoed, the way it felt, how hard it felt, and how much pain it felt on the top of my skull, like my scalp, there was a lot of pain, a lot of sharp pain, like right on the top. It felt like I had hit rocks. So I figured, again, this is all happening in the split second that I'm going through this, that as I was falling, the helmet must have popped off because it was barely on there. I mean, it was, the helmet was just sitting on, it'd be like taking a plate and just putting it on top of like a cushion or something. It's not latched on. At any movement, the plate's going to fall off. Well, that's what I figured. I figured the helmet had fallen off, and that's why it hurt so much when I hit. But it turns out I was wearing my helmet when I hit the ground. I just hit the ground so hard that it still hurt, and thank God that helmet stayed on my head. Now, the helmet flew off as soon as I flipped over, but it was on during the critical moment, thank goodness. And by the way, upon inspecting the helmet later, there were all these pretty significant dents in the top of the helmet. I don't know if they were always there, but I suspect they weren't. Just more evidence of how hard I hit and how important that helmet was. Just a reminder, everyone, please wear your helmet. All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. So as I'm pogoing off my head, a lot of things flash before my eyes. People say that your life flashes before your eyes as you're in a near-death situation. Well, I think that a lot of things can flash before your eyes, not just your entire life. For me, what flashed before my eyes were a number of things in detail. The most dominant thing in that half second that I had a lot of conversations with myself about was telling myself about my hubris. I remember just thinking before I even landed on the ground, I'm still pogoing off my head. I'm thinking, I even probably thought this as I was going over that cliff before I even hit the handlebars with my chest. I remember thinking, you arrogant, stupid 53-year-old man, what is wrong with you? You have only ridden a bike a few times in the past 30 years. What are you trying to prove? Why are you going off jumps? What are you doing? There's so much at risk here, not only just your life or your mobility, but you could ruin the family reunion on the first day. What's wrong with you? On YouTube and on Reddit, for many years now, the algorithm has been feeding me fail videos of people crashing, falling. It's not the dominant thing that the algorithm shows me, but I've seen a lot of these videos, skateboarding accidents, biking accidents, someone just trips. And the thing that I have learned, even just falling from standing, you can die or you can become paralyzed. Like if you fall in the wrong way or you hit the wrong thing, it's all over. And as I watch those videos, it just emphasizes to me that life is precious and your neck and your spine are precious and you have to be careful, and there's no reason to take those kinds of risks for a little bit of a fun moment, but potentially a lifetime of pain and injury or even death, like I said. And so I'm thinking about that too. I'm thinking of all the people in this BMX track, push, the pump track thing, you probably have spent the most time emphasizing and reminding yourself to not do this kind of stuff. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? You don't even care about biking. The biking thing wasn't even my idea. My mom wanted to do this. It's not like I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go biking, or I can't wait to go off jumps on this bike. If we didn't go biking that day, there's a chance I never would have been on a bicycle for the rest of my life, and I wouldn't have cared. What am I doing? What's the purpose of this? Okay, so another tangent here is about my sister, and it relates to this situation pretty closely. So a few years ago, she was curling. It's the sport when you're on ice and you have those stones and the brooms and everything. And she slipped and she fell and she hit her head really hard on the ice. Her husband described it as her head just bounced off the ice. And I might have some of the details wrong, but from my memory, for maybe an hour afterwards, maybe longer, her memory would reset every couple minutes. And from my memory, she told me that she would suddenly, her memory would reset maybe 30 minutes later. And I think maybe she was even at the hospital at this point. I'm not sure, but she would notice that her jeans were wet, but she didn't remember falling, right? So she comes to, and she's not comes to, but her memory resets, and she thinks, oh, my pants are wet. And she would ask her husband, did I wet my pants? Or something like that. And her husband would say something like, no, you fell on the ice and you hit your head. And then my sister would have a very similar response every time she was told this. She would say, oh, ha, 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 or something. And there would be a couple other things that she would repeat. And then her memory would reset and she would say, did I pee my pants? And it would just start over and over and over again. I could have some of those details wrong, but you get the point. Pretty serious, right? And I actually just asked her, I just texted her now and asked her what other symptoms, because from my memory, she had a lot of symptoms post-concussion. And she said, quote, I had and still have problems with names, even names I use daily. I used to forget what I was going to say in the middle of a sentence, or forget my point while telling a story. Super frustrating. It's actually a lot better now, but the name thing can fluctuate. End of quote. So pretty severe concussion, right? And ongoing effects. I have other people in my life who have had similar things, and their cognitive abilities are, at least to date, still impaired to some extent. And that's rough to think that your brain isn't working well. You might be forgetting things and you don't remember that you forgot them. That's rough, right? That's scary. It's frustrating. So when she told me this this is when she's telling me this a few years ago, and she was kind of laughing about it. We're having a laugh about it. But at some point I got serious and I turned to Colleen and I said, hey, don't ever do that again. And Colleen, my sister, said, yeah, okay. I don't remember doing this, but my sister will recall this, that I paused as if to move on to another subject, but then I stopped and turned back to Colleen and said, I'm serious. I mean it, Colleen. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever take that risk again. You don't want to have concussions. Concussions are serious, and you had a serious concussion. You have to be more careful. And my sister was like, okay, thanks, Kirk. I'll be careful. I was really serious. So earlier that day that we were on the bikes, my sister and I were talking about, maybe prompted by my mom telling a story about me falling on my head from the picnic table. And this is just earlier. This is a couple hours earlier. My sister is saying, remember that time when you said to me, you were really serious and you said, hey, don't ever have a concussion. And then you went away, you came back, you said, Colleen, I mean it. Don't ever do that again. And we're having a good laugh about it. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's good advice. And we shouldn't be laughing about concussions. I feel like my generation can do that. It's like, ha ha ha, it's funny. But it's, it can be funny, but it's also serious business. And I feel like younger people today are more appreciative of the seriousness of it. So earlier that day, I was like, yeah, I stand behind that. So fast forward, and I'm pogoing off my own head and thinking to some extent, wow, I'm going to eat my words. So yeah, hubris, thinking to myself, that'll never be me. Those days are behind me, like Icarus flying too close to the sun. Excessive overconfidence and arrogance, often leading to one's downfall. I was so angry at myself in that split second and after, just thinking, what are you doing? You know better than that. And I was saying this inside my head and outside my head. I was also just beating myself up we were having such a great time as a family. And no one was taking risks. I mean, there were a couple people taking some risks, but not like that. And I just thought, what are you doing? You're ruining everything. I mean, even if I recover, which I wasn't sure about, everyone's worried about me, and it also kind of throws a dark cloud over this fun event. It's no longer this wonderful, casual bike ride through the woods and the setting sun streaming through the leaves. It's no longer that. Now it's like Kirk almost died because he's stupid. Is he going to recover? Do we need to take him to the hospital? Just because I did something. Now, if I was, and I think I said this after, if I was driving, if we were on our bikes crossing the street and someone on a truck ran a red light and hit me and I was injured, well, that's not on me, right? Someone else is to blame for that. This crash was all my fault, 100%. No one else no one told me to do that. No one influenced me to do it. I just decided to take a stupid risk, and here we are. And I just kept thinking, and I just kept saying out loud, like, God, that was so dumb. It was because another part of it was, what if I had been paralyzed? So spoiler alert, I didn't break my neck or my back, seemingly. I've been checked out a week and a half later. I went to the doctor and they checked me out and everything seems fine, aside from one thing, which I'll get to later. But I just thought, because I felt so much as though I had broken something. I thought, there's just no way you're going to land that hard, harder than you've ever landed. And coming from someone that's landed on his head a lot in his life, there's no way you're getting out of this scot-free. And it just seemed like I dodged a serious bullet. And I'm just telling myself, you stupid dumbass. Why? You were this close to killing yourself or breaking your neck and becoming paralyzed. Like, what are you doing? That was so stupid. Why didn't you stop and just for 2 seconds and take in the terrain? What are you doing? You're not invincible. You're 53. You've lived past the invincible delusional years of your teenage life. And I keep saying this to myself, and my nephew, Jacob, at some point turns to me as we're riding bikes and he says, Uncle Kirk, I think you're being too hard on yourself. So I said, I need to just keep this internal, because I thought one way to really make the lesson land is to do this. Now, there's shame, right? Where you hate yourself and put yourself down. That's different than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like emphasizing a lesson, an opportunity for learning, right? And one way to do it, in the moment anyway, is, within reason, to berate myself as long as I believe I can handle it. One might argue it's a counterbalance to my arrogant hubris. A good counterbalance is to bring me down to earth, literally. And I actually use this philosophy as a therapist. I just used it the other day. I had a client that had made a mistake and they wanted to really let it sink in. They were saying, I don't know if I'm going to remember this in the future. I feel like I've really learned something here about how if left to my own devices, I will make that mistake, and I don't want to do that again. And I suggested that they apologize to the person that they harmed or that they affected. And my client was saying, oh, that would be really hard because I don't know that person that well, and I don't even like that person. You're suggesting I go to this person and humble myself to that person? I don't know if I can handle that. And I said, well, it's just a suggestion. But the thought that I have is, well, nothing will be more memorable than taking an action like that. It'd be hard to forget that, so that the next time you are about to go over a hill into the unknown too fast, you will have an opportunity to have this very loud memory come to the fore and guide you. So for me, the emphasis of don't just move forward because everything seems okay. Really focus on your hubris. Really focus on what was going on. What is it about your personality that led you to just going over that hill without taking precaution? There's something about you. This isn't isolated in all likelihood. That's what therapy can give us, is an opportunity to look at an individual, a discrete action, a discrete moment, right? A discrete incident, and say, does this say anything about who I am and my tendencies? Because we often have blind spots around that, and there's a lot of fruit that can come from that exploration. It's not always fruitful. Sometimes it is just an incident, but a lot of times it does reflect something that we are in denial of. Anyway, so I want to go on another tangent, but before doing that, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. So the tangent is that there are two examples from my teenage life of how life gave me an opportunity to learn from my hubris. The first story is a story I've told in the podcast before. I was running for student government and I needed to give a speech. And the thing was that I was so terrified of public speaking. You would maybe ask, well, why are you running for office? The answer is, I don't know. I'm one of the most terrified people of the stage, and yet I frequently find and have found myself on stage. Go figure. I'm running for office, and everyone else is just giving regular speeches, right? They have their note cards and their bullet points, and it's a 5-minute speech or whatever. Well, I'm thinking, well, I can figure out a way to give a speech without actually having to give a speech. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this other speech that an older student did the week before. And I'm going to, again, long story short, I'm going to play the same song that she did. It's a Madonna song. And I'm going to jump around and dance, and I'll add a flair because I'm Asian and I'm one of the only people of color in my entire school. And so I'll lean into that and I'll dress up in a karate outfit, and I made this giant piece of paper with, said vote for Kirk or something. And I like karate kicked through the through the piece of paper. So stupid. Again, medium story shorter. I completely screwed it up. It was not funny. I thought it would be funny in my head, but it was just plain stupid. And as I was dancing around the auditorium, I was given an opportunity to think about my hubris. Just like, why did you do this? Why did you think this? At the very least, you could have just had a regular speech the worst version of that speech is nowhere near the worst version of what you're doing right now. Why did you think this would work? You didn't plan ahead. Because the whole thing was, the previous week, the older classman, she randomly grabbed a student from the audience to dance with who happened to be one of my best friends. And so I thought it'd be funny if I also danced with him, because he's kind of a stiff, he isn't the best dancer. And so I thought I would grab him. Well, I didn't look for him in the audience. There's 400 students in my class. I burst through the piece of paper in my karate kick, and I quickly scan the 400 faces, and I can't find him because I didn't look to see where. I didn't tell him to sit in the front row, or I didn't even tell him to sit near an aisle. So I was dancing around, frantically looking for him, never found him in the entire song, and then just walked away. There's no punchline. It was the dumbest thing ever. So during and after, a very similar experience of, Kirk, what are you doing? Why did you think this would be a good idea? You need to check your arrogance. Like, what's wrong with you? Why did you do this? You're not that smart. You're not that good. You're not that creative. Knock it off. The other example, this is way worse, but very much a huge learning experience. I've talked about this on the podcast before. In a nutshell, me and my friends, we had this group. It was kind of like a fraternity in a sense, or a club. I don't know what you'd call it, but there were like 9 or 10 of us. And we were sort of the cool nerds, if that makes any sense. You know, we weren't the popular kids, but we weren't the nerdiest of the nerds. You know, most of us did well in school. Half of us played sports. Half of us played Dungeons and Dragons back when that was definitely not a cool thing. And we didn't wear the right clothes. We didn't listen to the right music, whatever. So we were a tight-knit group, and we were very close and very tight. And this random kid that we kind of knew, I heard that he was, well, we had heard as a group that he was talking shit about us. And so because of my underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, I decided that I was going to put this guy in his place, apparently. And I'm not a fighter. I've been in fights, you know, it would happen occasionally, but I'm definitely not on that end of the spectrum. You know, if I was out and about and some guy shouldered me, my first thought would not be, let's throw down. My first thought would be like, okay, fighting proves nothing. How do I get out of this while also not looking like a complete fool? You know, it wasn't my policy to fight. There were a lot of guys I had close friends where that was their first reaction, was punch first, ask questions later. I had given up on that notion a long time ago. Plus, the neighborhood I lived in just didn't really call for that anyway. But in this moment, I thought, well, maybe I saw a movie that inspired me to be this. I don't know. Boys in the Hood. What was it around that time? I think it was. So I tell my friends, are like, let's go get it, because we know where he lives. So we all pile in our cars, 3 or 4 cars, and I am driving to the guy's house with Lita, one of the first co-hosts on the podcast, sitting next to me. She's even more of a goody two-shoes than I am. She's the sort of girl back then that hosted Young Life at her house, never drank, never smoked, never swore, that kind of thing, straight A's. And I'm telling her what to write, and I'm dictating to her to write this letter to this guy of intimidation, in the letter, handwritten. And I just think it's so comical because Lita's handwriting looks like a girl's handwriting back then. I saved a lot of her notes that we would give each other notes. We were really close in high school, and it's very flowery and soft looking. She's an artist. She has impeccable handwriting. So I'm driving with, I'm on a mission to get to this guy's house. I'm going to put this guy in his place. I don't have a plan. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the guy's going to do. I'm only thinking, half a step into the future. I'm telling Lita what to write, and it's stuff like, how dare you talk shit about us? We're going to put you in your place. I think I even threatened to kill him. I'm not sure. I or at least threatened. It was a threatening letter on some level. And we pull up at his house. I knock on his door. I shove the letter in his face. This is one of the worst moments of my entire life. What I'm telling you, I don't feel comfortable telling anyone about this, particularly on the internet. If you hate me from now on because of this, I understand. But if it helps, this was almost 40 years ago for me. This was 37 years ago. I've learned a lot since then, but it's awful. Anyway, so I shove this letter in his face and turn around, walk back to the sidewalk. All my friends are there, eight-ish of us. And we're all just standing there thinking, okay, well, now what? And this is all me. No one told me to do this. No one was doing it with me. No one was encouraging me to do it. I was doing something, and I was dragging everyone with. Well, what the guy does, understandably, is he feels threatened. And he comes out of his house with, what he did, it's kind of interesting detail. He goes into his garage, and we hear him like sawing something. He comes out of his house with an axe handle. So what I'm guessing is he went into the garage to defend himself against people who are on his front lawn threatening to hurt him, which I totally understand why he would be scared. And when he was home by himself, his parents were there. I think he went into his garage and grabbed an axe to come out to defend himself. But he thought, well, an axe is going too far, so I'm going to cut off the axe head and just come out with the handle, which, a good axe handle is quite a thing. It's like a baseball bat. He comes out and he says that he's going to, kill all of us or something. And I'm standing there going, well, I hadn't thought about this contingency, which is an obvious contingency. And I'm thinking, I don't really want to get into a fight. Again, I threatened him. I don't even know if the guy was talking shit about us. I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who, to quote REO Speedwagon. And plus, who cares? We, as a group, did things on purpose to get people to talk shit about us. We would dress up in these ridiculous outfits. We would plan this out. Be like, okay, tomorrow we're going to all wear our green jumpsuits. We had these green, mechanic jumpsuits. I think they were from the Army. We bought them at an Army surplus store. They looked so stupid, but we thought it was hilarious because everyone looked at us like we were stupid. When we would go to dances, we would purposely dance stupid, and everyone look at us thinking we were stupid. We loved that kind of thing. We called it dorking. So what do I care if some random guy who we don't know very well is talking shit about us? It's like, who cares? There's 1,400 students in this school. What do I care what one student is talking about us? And I don't even know if he was talking shit about it. And maybe we deserve to be talked shit about. What do I care? But there I am standing on the front lawn, and he's coming after us, and I'm thinking, how did I get into this situation? Well, hubris, arrogance, overconfidence, not thinking about the consequences, and dragging a bunch of other people into it. It's not like I just did a header off of a BMX track and smashed my head into the ground. This is involving all my friends. Long story short, the letter is given to the school by him. The principal and the vice principal and the teachers, they get all the parents together, all my friends' parents, they read the letter. And it's well understood that I was the one that essentially, Lita wrote it, but I dictated it. It's my letter. And the whole school becomes aware of this feud between me and this guy. The guy says he's gonna eliminate all of my friends, and then I am gonna be the final person that he beats up. And then I find out that this guy is involved with gang members, dangerous older dudes who were known for their, psychopathy and violence. It was terrifying. I was terrified. And my friends would be isolated, because we would just be going on with our lives. And these guys would jump my friends, and blood, all my fault, all because of me. I'm the one who started this. And why? For what? Again, if it was important, like this guy had a gun, he was going to shoot my parents or something, then, I could understand taking drastic action and maybe making a mistake because I don't know what to do. This was over nothing. There was no need to do anything. When I was informed, it was my friend's girlfriend who had heard. She said to my friend, her boyfriend, and I am there hearing it too, she says, "Oh, so-and-so was talking shit about you guys." 99 times out of 100, I'd just be like, huh, anyway, moving on. Well, why did I zero in on, I didn't have a policy about beating up guys who were talking. What was wrong with me? Arrogance. I thought I would get away with it. I thought I could do anything. I thought I could roll up and threaten this guy and nothing would happen. I thought I mean, I don't know if I want to say I thought I ruled the world. I mean, it wasn't that far, but certainly I thought I was invincible. I thought that the guy would say, "I'm sorry." I thought he would be scared and he would be like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry." Why did I think that? And plus, why do I need that? Well, I don't need to humiliate the guy. No one's humiliated. The guy's talking shit about us. Okay. We're old enough to not have, plus we like to look silly. Good. Talk shit about us. We don't care. I can't believe I'm even telling this. I'm pretty sure I've told this on the podcast before, but again, almost 40 years ago. So to wrap up the story, him and his friends corner a bunch of my friends, and some of my friends were very frail, small guys were involved in this too. It's just horrible. I've talked at length with all these guys, including the guy in question. I mean, not at length with him, but resolutions have been made. But the title of the story is Kirk's an Idiot. That's the only thing you need to know. So he's building up to me, and he invites me to meet him at Lake Sammamish Park to have a rumble with him. And I'm like, I'm just not interested. I don't have anything to prove. If you think I'm a wimp for not showing up, okay. Nothing good can come for that. Either you hurt me, maybe permanently, or I hurt you permanently, maybe. One of us could go to jail. I mean, nothing's proved by this. It's only downhill. There's no benefit. Suddenly I'm not arrogant. I'm like careful about my, once the consequences come home to roost, suddenly I'm thoughtful and considerate of possible outcomes. But during this time, I remember I was starting a band with my friends, and I remember I was at my friend's house, kind of glad because he lived far out of town, so I felt good to be out of town and out of danger. I felt like I couldn't concentrate on music. I was just ruminating on what is going to happen to me and my friends. Is someone going to get seriously hurt? What did I do? Why did I do this? And I remember thinking that a lot of learning and changing and developing had happened in the span of 5 hours or something, or a day or two. I remember thinking, there's me before I shoved that note in that guy's face, and there's me after. I feel different. I feel like transformed. I feel like I have grown up. I feel like I now understand how to be an adult, even though I'm only 16 years old or something. I understand that there are consequences. That sounds obvious, but it's not obvious to teenagers. And, this learning would help me when I would become later, 8-10 years later, when I became a family therapist. And a third of my clients were teenagers, defiant teenagers, and their parents. And, teenagers would find themselves in my office because they would have made really poor choices or were making a lot of poor choices. And the parents would be beside themselves, and it's complicated, but one of the things that would help me was I was there once, and I changed, and I learned, and it took a big consequence to wake me up. It's not like I hadn't been given the opportunity before. It just, this one was the most noticeable. And so I remember in that maelstrom, in the eye of the storm, I remember, or I'm at the center of that storm, I remember thinking, I will never be that person again. I am forever different in a good way. I also remember thinking it could have been worse. So I'm kind of glad that this happened. I remember thinking I probably needed something this bad to wake me up. And I'm glad it wasn't worse. It probably needed to be bad like this, which sucks, but it could have been so much worse. So I'm glad it happened because I've learned, and I will just be apologizing to my friends for the rest of my life, which I have done. It's an ongoing joke in my friend group about this. Anyway, so hubris, arrogance, overconfidence, leading to one's downfall, flying too close to the sun. And in that moment, as I am pogoing off my head on the ground, I am not specifically thinking about those events in high school, but the feeling of disappointment in myself was the same feeling of, what are you doing? Why did you do this? Why did you think this would go okay? You're ruining it for you. You're ruining it for everyone else. You didn't have to do this. You could have been more cautious. What are you doing? Stop and think, please. So I'm thinking about all that. And I'm also thinking about how I'm going to ruin the reunion. That was going through my head immediately as my head hit the ground. I'm like, oh. So this leads to another tangent. Sorry for but it's all there. This is all relevant stuff. All right. So as I was saying, this was day one of my family reunion. Well, specifically what this event was it was a celebration of my parents' 60th anniversary. But they had their 60th anniversary last year. So we were redoing it this year because last year a bunch of us got COVID at the beginning of the weekend and towards the middle of the week, including myself. So so let me back up to the 50th reunion, which was 11 years ago. We, as a family, so it's my parents and us 4 kids and all the grandkids, we all got together 11 years ago at Yellowstone. We all stayed in the same lodge house thing, and it was one of the best moments of my life. So many wonderful things happened. So many meaningful moments, so many funny and wonderful moments. I have some of the best video footage of my life, just filming my family playing heads up, or just all the funny bonding. So my parents led us in these dancing routines. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but I have a lot of fond memories from the 50th, and I think a lot of people in my family do. I think particularly my parents. And as their 60th anniversary was approaching, we thought, hey, we should try to repeat that. We should all get together and try to have a similar experience. And so I started to plan it with other people in my family. And we decided we would go to Lake Chelan, which is in Central Washington, and people would fly in, blah, blah, blah. And we get there, and I'd been planning it for a year. I had been setting everything up. I'd been delegating, and I was really, really looking forward to this. We arrive in Chelan, and almost immediately someone gets very sick and tests positive for COVID. Other people start getting sick, and we're like at the beginning of the week. A fair amount of money has been spent on this, not only for lodging, but airfare and tickets and everything. And the vacation time that everyone has to take off, and everyone comes. In my family, everyone shows. Not every family is like this, where when we have get-togethers, there's really no question as to whether or not so-and-so is going to be there. Everyone comes. And so at the 60th last year, everyone's there, and people are starting to get sick. And so we said, okay, we could, and I'm really worried about my parents. It was still, I feel like today in 2024, the worries that I have about people dying from COVID is less. Of course, it's still a risk, but it's not as intense as my fears earlier, even just a year ago. And so we were really worried about my parents. They're 80 years old, or they would have been almost 80 around that time. And we don't want them to get, how horrible would that be? And so we did a lot of things to try to minimize the risk. And so the people who were testing positive, we would isolate them. And then we started wearing masks, and we would also spend a lot of time outside. But it really threw a wrench in the festivities. It did not feel like the 50th. I don't know if I want to say this out loud. My family might listen to this episode. But the 60th, in those first few days, it felt different. I think there's a number of reasons, but I think the COVID thing was definitely a part of it. Because we're all together, and some of us are isolated in a room in another one of the rental houses. It just felt bad to exclude them like that. And you worry about, how are they doing? Or and then we're all worried, or at least some of us are worried, like, do some of us have it and we're just not symptomatic yet? Is the other shoe going to drop soon? Which it did for some of us, including me. And incidentally, I was sicker than anyone. I've never been that sick in my life. I was so sick for a few days. So a few months after the dust settles, after that 60th, I'm thinking we should do a redo. I want that experience again. And it felt incomplete. And so I started planning, and along with my sister, but, and we're delegating, but a lot of it was on my shoulders, which is fine. I like to plan. That's my role in the family. And if I have enough time, which I did this past year, because, I've been scaling back on the YouTube channel a bit. So I have been planning this 61st for a long time. And there's a lot of logistics, when and where, and the itinerary. And there's just a lot of things you have to coordinate. And everyone has feelings about things, which is fine. That's good. People have, I don't know if I want to do that activity. And other people are like, well, what about this activity? There's a lot of politics or diplomacy. It's totally fine. And my family is extremely flexible and easygoing. But still, when you're in the leadership position, there's just a lot of planning and communicating and exploring and pulling teeth, and but so I was putting a lot of effort into it, and others were as well. And we are heading into the redo, is what we're calling it, the 60th anniversary redo, which was essentially my parents' 61st anniversary. And this time I wanted it to be more simple, because the first time, the 60th, we were in Chelan, and having some people get COVID made it kind of hard, because none of us were in our hometown. Whereas this time I'm like, well, how about we do it in the Seattle, Bellingham area? That way, if anyone gets sick, then some people will just be near their own homes and can just go to their house. We don't have to isolate them in an Airbnb somewhere, plus they'll be near their doctor, or that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of consideration around that. Also, I reminded everyone to stay safe a couple weeks before flying out, that sort of thing. There's only so much you can do. But anyway, so it's day one of the 61st, and all this is running through my head, and I do a header off my bike, and I'm pogoing off my head thinking, oh, great, Kirk, like, you didn't waste much time to ruin this one. What's wrong with you? That was another thing that was going through my head. And, it's not just the logistics or the money or the time. My dad, the one thing that he would instill in us kids was that family is the most important thing. And I feel that. I believe that. I adhere to that. And as a family, as grandkids get older and get married and start to have their own kids, it's harder to get everyone together. And my sister lives in Minnesota. I don't see her very often. I don't see her husband and kids very often. And we miss each other. And to have these moments, it's incredibly meaningful to me and to a lot of people in my family. And so to pogo off my head for a stupid choice that didn't need to be made, to ruin that, it's a big deal to me. So I pogo off my head and I land on my back. And coincidentally, my mom was filming from afar. You can see me go over the cliff, and then you kind of see me pop up. So I think what I did was I pogoed off my head. I landed on my, I continued rolling, if that makes any sense. And I landed on my back, and then I popped up, I think out of the roll, or even just trying to stand up and say, everything's fine. I'm not exactly sure. I have to look closely at the Zapruder film, if you will. But was immediately noticing that I had a concussion and that I was dizzy, very similar to the concussion I had in football, that one when I described it, when I was trying to walk back to the huddle and I was drifting to the right. It felt like that, but worse. It felt like if I stood up, I would just fall over because I was so concussed. So I laid down, and I was trying to reassure people around me that I was okay, even though I was pretty sure I was not okay. It's such a weird reflex that we have as humans, to be like, I'm okay. A worse fate than death is to be a bother to other people, I guess. And I'm trying to tell people, everything's fine. Just let me lay here. I'll just go on having fun. It's the 63 do. Ignore me. Just put a blanket over me and move on with your life. Forget I was ever alive. I don't know. But I can't get the words out. And I'm like, I can't talk. So I immediately think, oh, I must have had the wind knocked out of me, as they say. But a couple more, pseudo breaths, and I'm realizing this isn't like I've had, so tangent time. I've had the wind knocked out of me. I think everyone's had the wind knocked out of them a few times at least growing up, that kind of thing, particularly. Like one notable time was when I fell out of a tree and landed on my butt. And I've talked about this before, how my friend's mom was vacuuming inside the house, and I'm outside the house in a tree, and I fell. And as she's vacuuming, she hears me hit the ground. She hears a thump, and she looks out, and she sees me just sitting up at the bottom of the tree going, and, you can have the wind knocked out of you. Or in play fighting, someone like kicks you in the stomach, and you have the wind knocked out of you, that kind of thing. Well, this was different. This is something I've actually never experienced before. It felt higher up, if that makes any sense. And later, I would look up the details on this and consult with medical professionals. And what I think happened was, one, when you have a blow to your neck and spine, apparently your muscles that are all around your spine will tense up in the effort of protecting your spine. It will, your muscles up, my muscles, this is 10, 11 days later, the muscles in my neck and my back along my spine are really, really sore. And they were super, super sore that first couple days. And apparently our muscles they'll just contract like reflexively to hold on to the spine so it doesn't break or fall apart or something. Thank God that I had that reflex, because I'm pretty sure without that, my spine would be dust. But anyway, so what that can do is it can cause muscles that are in your neck and around your throat to contract such that it's hard to breathe or speak. So I think that was part of it. Another part of it is that, and I don't remember this, but Kyle, my nephew, saw this happen and informed me that when I landed on the front wheel on the ground, I accelerated forward and hit my chest on the handlebars. I don't remember that. It all happened all I remember is pogoing off my head. And really, thank God I did land on the handlebars with my chest, because if I had pogoed just straight off the bike, God knows how the acceleration would have been, or the velocity would have been. But anyway, I hit the handlebars so hard that I actually broke my sternum. I still have a break in my sternum, and that's the pain that I'm still living with. That part of it is quite painful. When I breathe, particularly when I lay down, going to bed, apparently, like anyway, point is it's painful, and it was particularly painful in that moment, leading me to not be able to breathe, because as I would breathe in and out or try to speak, that fracture in my sternum would be aggravated because of the movement in my rib cage, and I couldn't speak or breathe very well. So that's all that's happened. So my spine, neck, head, seemingly okay. Concussion, minimal, no seeming cognitive problems like my sister experienced of not remembering names or losing the thread halfway through a sentence. I spent a lot of time over the next 24 hours running through a bunch of cognitive tests on myself to see if I had any not that it's not like you can do anything. There's no surgery or pill you can take to help yourself with that sort of thing. And by the way, if you ever hit your head, you should, consult with a medical professional. I have two medical professionals in my family who are right there. They were the closest people to me. It was Jessica and Kyle. They both have doctorates, and they were the closest people to me. So when I landed, they were the first people. As I'm looking up, they're right over me, helping me out. And I remember being very grateful that there are two medical people, not only in my family, but that were right there and walking me through. So I'm laying in the dirt, and I'm writhing in pain, and I'm testing all of my limbs, and I can move all of them. There's no tingling. There's no numbness, thank goodness. I was still convinced that something was broken, though, in my head or neck. Turned out everything's okay there. Other family would arrive. By the way, Stacy wasn't there because she wasn't on the bike ride. But other family arrived, and again, I'm trying to make a joke, and I can barely spit it out because I can't breathe through my broken sternum and all the muscles contracting around my throat and the pain I'm in. And I think I managed to say something like, "Oh my God, did you see that sick move that I did?" I don't know. Because, I thought I was fine, I guess. At the very least, if I'm fine or not fine, it doesn't do any good to have everyone in my family have their day ruined, whether I'm fine or unfine. There's nothing anyone can do. Anyway. And frankly, it's embarrassing, right? I don't know if emasculating is the best word for it, but it just feels like, oh, old man does a header off of a bike just like an old man would, or I don't know, or a klutz, or someone that's stupid. I don't know. It just felt like I just wanted everyone to just go on with their lives and leave me there. So I tried to stand up. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, I was still concussed and dizzy, so I laid back down. Eventually, I was able to stand, and I rode the bike back. It took a while for us to get back to my parents' house. That was probably more hubris. I probably should have called an Uber, maybe an ambulance, but I thought, I'll be okay. And my niece and nephew seemed to think that as long as I'm mobile and I can turn my head and don't have any noticeable concussion symptoms, everything will be okay. And everything was okay. And just, spoiler alert, the rest of the week was wonderful. And no one got sick. Well, no one got sick seemingly during the time. I currently have COVID. I just tested positive for COVID a few hours ago. And I don't know who gave it to me, but it's possible that someone in my family gave it to me. It would make sense because 2 days after seeing them and having not seen anybody else, I started having symptoms. But I seemingly got it maybe on the last day of the 9-10 days that we were together. And I remember thinking that going into the week. I was just thinking, because, there's not just COVID, there's various different viruses. And I'm thinking, there's I don't know what sort of percentage chance, but there's a percentage chance that some of us are going to get sick because of travel and all the hugging and all the sharing of M&Ms and potato chips that we're doing. And I thought, I just hope that none of us get sick until the very end, which apparently happened. I'm not happy that I have COVID. I'm not happy to think about other people in my family getting COVID, but silver lining, no one got COVID in the middle of the week. We were able to have a wonderful 60th redo. My back was really rough, and my chest, it was a fair amount of pain. I couldn't check my blind spot when I would drive. I couldn't turn my head for the first, 5 or 6 days. That was one of the first things I noticed that I was getting better, was that I was able to check my blind spot while driving. So I was really reliant on my mirrors, which isn't great. There's also a little indicator that says someone's in your blind spot, a little light that goes off. So I was relying on that. I wasn't doing much driving, but anyway, sleeping was the worst part of it, though. There was something about lying down or just trying to shift one's weight while in bed that the first couple of nights, it basically, I couldn't lay down. I had to sleep essentially sitting up in the bed because it was physically impossible for me to lay down. Anyway, but that got better pretty quick, and I went to the doctor after everyone went home, and the doctor said I had a broken sternum, which I didn't know, but makes a lot of sense given how much pain I'm in. And I've never broken a rib, to my knowledge. And the doctor, said everything's good with my spine, and that there's different stretches I can do for my neck muscles and stuff. But yeah, it was just a wonderful time. It was wonderful to have my parents experiencing family again, because, growing up with 4 kids in the family, there was so much going on in our house when I was a kid. We talked about this in some of the interviews I did with my family. And then with Empty Nest, which started maybe 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago for my parents. So for the past 30 years, it's been just my parents in the house. And it's, there's pros and cons, but this time for this family reunion, this 60th redo, a lot of my family that were flying in, my sister and all of her clan, actually slept at my parents' house in guest rooms and on the floor and stuff. And my parents throughout the week would just marvel at how wonderful it felt to have energy and family and youth and togetherness in the house. My dad would also say that he loved how he could just sit back and go with the flow. When it's just him and my mom, he has to plan his own day. He has to figure out what he's going to do. He has to self-generate. And at his age, I think it feels good to just sit back and let his children and his children's children tell him what to do, and all the while being with family and bonding and together and happy and laughing. And all those moments that I had at the 50th, like writing a song as a family. We wrote another song as a family that this past week. There's new members of the family because people have gotten married, significant others. So we've integrated them pretty well, I think. It was just a really wonderful time, in spite of the fact that I did a header off my bike. So let's return to Icarus. Daedalus, his father, told Icarus not to fly too close to the sun. But Daedalus also told Icarus to not fly too low to the water, because the seawater would soak the feathers. So it's not just don't fly too high, but also don't fly too low. There's a balance. There's the middle way. And it's interesting that Americans, people in my circle, only remember the don't fly too high. I mean, that's what Icarus did, is he flew too high. But I actually had to look it up, and because I'm like, oh, well, Icarus. And then I read the myth again, and I was like, oh, wait, I don't know if I ever knew that Daedalus said, also don't fly too low, meaning don't fly too high, don't have hubris, don't be arrogant, don't be overconfident, understand your limitations, but also don't fly too low. Don't undersell yourself. Don't retreat into safety. There's a middle way. And so as I was over the past week while with my family, I kept revisiting the outline for this episode. Pretty much, I don't know, half an hour later, I thought I should make an episode about this. There's a lesson to be learned. And in line with what I was saying earlier, there's nothing like solidifying a lesson for me than revisiting the lesson. And one way you can revisit the lesson is by making a full episode, by writing out an outline and giving it a lot of thought, thinking about what messages you want to put out there, processing the experience verbally as I'm doing. And originally the episode was just going to be about hubris and was just going to be about understanding one's limitations. But as the week progressed, I kept thinking about moments in which something akin to hubris actually has helped me in my life. I wouldn't call it hubris, but maybe I would. So when I looked up the story of Icarus, I was delighted to find that it's not just don't fly too high, it's also don't fly too low. So when I think about what is on the other side of that coin of hubris, so let's look at hubris again. Excessive overconfidence and arrogance, often leading to one's downfall. Taking risks without considering one's limitations. Flying too close to the sun. Well, the opposite of hubris are things like restraint, being reserved, not taking risks. But to me, this isn't the other side of the coin. That's just the opposite of hubris. That's flying too low. So what's the other side of the coin, or what's that middle way? What's that balance? What's flying within your limitations? And there's one word that I landed. It took me a while, looking at a lot of thesauruses, and that word is judiciousness. So you have hubris on one side of the coin and judiciousness on the other side. Maybe it's a three-sided coin. Maybe it's hubris, judiciousness, and restraint, or being too careful. And judiciousness is the middle way. The definition of judiciousness is using good judgment, making wise and sensible decisions. So it's not only taking no risks, right? It's not being reserved. It's not always taking the safe route. It's not flying too low. It's knowing what risks one should take, making decisions about risks in a wise and relatively reasonably informed manner. Judiciousness, or conscientiousness is another word, but I think judiciousness is more specific. And as I was working on the outline in my head, this is all in my head over the week, I would think about moments that, I don't know, again, it's not hubris, but it's akin to hubris, judiciousness, maybe like smart hubris, I don't know, where I was arrogant in a way, I was overconfident in a way, but I did it in a judicious manner, and it worked out in a way that would have never been able to meet my needs otherwise. Starting this podcast was an act of hubris or of overconfidence. A part of me from the very beginning in 2008, I suspected and maybe knew that the podcast would be successful. I had no reason to believe that the podcast would be successful. And what do I mean by successful? Well, I measured success to some extent in the beginning about by the metric of making enough money at the podcast so that I could scale back on other aspects of my life, because that's a concrete way of looking at it. But another more important metric that I had was that I don't know, enough people would have found the podcast and liked the podcast. I always knew that our audience would be a very small audience, but if you throw a wide net to the entire internet, and there's 7.5 billion people or something, and if 0.0001%, something like that, listens to at least 2 minutes of the podcast, and 0.001% listen to the whole episode, and maybe 1% of those people listen to a second episode, and 1% of those people listen to more than one episode, and 1% of those people actually become fans of the podcast and like this thing, then you have a pretty sizable audience. And then if you can get a percentage of those people to become patrons or YouTube members or something, then you can spend more time making the podcast. A part of me always knew that I would be able to get there. And this is before monetization. This is before Patreon even existed. So I had no viable, justifiable reason to believe that the podcast would be successful. I had no background in media or in journalism. I was a teacher, and that did help. But, there's a far cry from being a teacher and being a content provider, right? And I just always knew, even through the years of the podcast not doing well, year after year after year of very low numbers, first year, second year, it wasn't until year 7 or year 8 that the podcast started to become successful in the way that I thought of it, right? Because of Patreon. And it created this feedback loop with more people becoming patrons. I could scale back on work, which meant I could spend more time on the podcast, and then things just kept increasing from there pretty much. But think about 7 years. Every week that passes and I'm putting all this effort into the podcast, varying levels of effort, but effort. And in my head, I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is going to work in the landscape of all the other content providers. There's going to be a lot of successful psychology podcasts and YouTube channels, and I think I could be one of them. That's hubris. It's arrogance. It's confidence based on no evidence. I mean, zero evidence. If anything, there was a lot of evidence pointing in the opposite direction, given that after 7 years, I was not successful, really. So would I have started the podcast or continued to work on the podcast if I wasn't overconfident, if I didn't have at least some hubris? Now, how do we differentiate between harmful hubris and helpful hubris? Maybe that's the term, helpful hubris, or judiciousness, right? Well, the consequences to having the podcast was relatively minimal compared to doing a header off of a bicycle. So that's one factor to consider. It was always on my extra time that I had beyond work and other activities. So there wasn't a huge sacrifice. Also, even if we were never successful, I had a blast doing it. I would get together with my friends and we would talk into a microphone and have a good time and post it. And there would be some people that would write in and it felt good. So even without the level of success that the podcast would eventually achieve, it still was successful. And I remember even thinking that. It's like, even if this goes nowhere, it's still valuable to me, even at this very low level, right? So it's judicious. Now, could I have had overconfidence in a way that would have been harmful hubris, like if I had, say, quit my job at the university early on and said, I'm going to become a podcaster, like way before I had any reason to believe that I could pay my bills from the podcast. Yeah, that would be hubris. That would be overconfident. That would be arrogant. Or if I don't know, insulted other podcasters saying I was better than them because I just was prideful or something, that would be hubris. So this is where my brain kept going. Another thing is just becoming a therapist. I had no reason to believe that I would be successful as a therapist. I had no reason to believe that I would even like to be a therapist. I had a very small experience as a client in college when I was 19. I maybe 10 sessions with a therapist that sat on the other side of the room behind a desk. And I remember liking it, but that's all that I knew. I had never taken a psychology class really in college, during my bachelor's degree. I didn't have anyone in my life, in my family. I didn't know anyone that was a therapist. I didn't know anyone that worked in psychology. I really just had no idea. But when I was in traffic in my Honda Civic, just sitting there and I'm thinking, I don't know if I like the career I'm in. What else could I do? Therapist pops into my head for the very first time, and within a week or two, I'm already applying to programs. In a way, you could say that's hubris. It's overconfidence. It's maybe even arrogant to believe that I could do it. Why did I think I could do it? I had no experience in that role. I wasn't one of those people that people came to talk about their problems. I mean, people would, but I wasn't known for that, right? It was untested as to whether or not I had the empathy or the compassion or the chops or listening skills or even the interest, really, to persevere and survive as a therapist. I didn't even know if I could manage graduate school. It's a completely different form of education, being a therapist and the program, right? Before, I took a lot of STEM courses and that kind of, and plus bachelor's courses tend to be more buttoned up regarding the testing and that kind of stuff. In graduate school, to become a therapist, it's very floppy. It's very amorphous. It's a lot of emotion, a lot of development, as it should be, because memorizing things isn't going to help you be a better therapist. So, is a bit arrogant, a bit overconfident. Could have been harmful hubris if things didn't work out. But I took that leap. It was a huge risk. I was going into a lot of debt. I was quitting my career in market research. And, it was maybe after I graduate. Well, I mean, what ended up happening was I get fired from my first internship. And if things had gone a certain way, I was just about to walk away from the profession altogether. And then Tony Collis, the dean, who died recently, he told me to stick it out, and I stuck it out. If I had quit graduate school, it would have been a huge waste of time and money, like tens of thousands of dollars, right? So it could have been harmful hubris if it had gone a certain way. But I'm so glad that I had that hubris, whether we call it harmful, or I guess it just depends partially on luck to some extent. Like even the bike ride, I just as easily could have never crashed, if I'd gone a different direction on that BMX, because I had already gone off a few jumps and everything was fine. The comical part of that, I don't know if I emphasize this, my family is going into because there's kind of, as we're going down the path, we were all strung out pretty wide. We weren't in a big clump. And so family members going into this little BMX thing. And then I see them, oh, that looks fun. And I head in and I go off, like jump and then jump and then jump and then up on a plateau and then header. So it was like 2.5 seconds, maybe 5 seconds of time. I entered the BMX track and was on my ass in under 5 seconds. That's just how, it's just another comical aspect of this. But anyway, if it was designed a little differently, if I had stopped or if someone had been in my way and I would have stopped and looked over and went like, oh, I'm glad I didn't do that, I could have easily just not crashed, right? And then, I don't know if I'd call it helpful hubris, but at the very least it wouldn't have been harmful hubris. So part of this has to do with luck, really. So where's the line? How do we know the difference between harmful and helpful hubris? How do we know the difference between being too cautious or judiciousness or overconfidence? Where's that line? And you can think about it for yourself. When have you exhibited hubris? Where are you on that spectrum? I imagine everyone can gauge. Are you overly cautious? Are you flying too low to the water? Are you flying too high? Do you have a good balance? What contexts are different for you? So after pogoing off my head, I wanted to eliminate risk from my life entirely. I even called my wife, who is a lot more careful than I am, and I told her not only, what happened and that I was okay for the most part, but I also apologized for all the risks that I have taken that she has lamented. Like, I don't know, buying something that you're not sure if it'll work out, or there's a lot of times where my wife is exhibiting the careful side of life, and I'm like, it'll be okay. And so I'm telling her, I'm sorry for all of that. I will never do that again. This is in the aftermath right afterwards. I'm telling my wife that I will never take a risk ever again. But Daedalus didn't say don't fly just too high. Don't just avoid flying too high. He said don't fly too low. So I wanted to figure out, in my old age, normally I am okay enough at finding that balance, at not flying too high and not flying too low. So what was it about this bike ride that pushed me too high? What was it about this activity that caused me to overlook my normal gauge of what was too high or too low? What need was I trying to meet by taking risks? And this is a question I often ask my clients in situations like this, and you can ask for yourself. What need am I trying to meet? What subconscious need, or what need am I not paying attention to that I am trying to meet by doing this? So while writing this outline, I thought about what it was, and I thought, well, was it trying to show off? Am I trying to get accolades or admiration from people by taking risks? Because it wasn't just the risks at the BMX track, it was taking risks maybe throughout the bike ride. And I thought, well, maybe a little bit, maybe like 2% of the motivation to take the risks. Because it wasn't just going in the BMX track, it was specifically not stopping to take a look over the ridge. That moment, why did I not stop? Normally I would stop. Why didn't I stop and look? Was it to show off? Nah, yeah, maybe because I look cooler, I suppose. But I'm 53. I don't have that to prove anymore in that way anyway. But maybe 2%. Another need was maybe I wanted to feel young again. My all the grandkids in my family, they're in their 20s generally, and they're all young and able, and they don't complain about trifocals. And maybe there's a part of me that wants to be young again. And this one I think could be a minor part, maybe 10% of the reason why I didn't stop to look over the edge. Just my own, not wanting to show off to them that I'm young, but just feeling like, hey, I don't do youthful things. And I feel like an old person who sits in front of his computer and talks into a microphone and doesn't exercise enough and worries about the economy or something. When I was younger, I just was carefree more. It felt like it anyway. So I would like to do that, and to symbolically do it through this bike ride, I think was a part of that. And I think I remember consciously even thinking about that at the time. But that wasn't most of it. That was just a tiny part of it. And another motivation I thought was maybe I wanted to lead the way. This is the first day of our redo. And the original 60th reunion, or the 60th anniversary celebration, it seemed there seemed to be some sort of barrier to it, to everybody coalescing. I don't know if that was true. It just felt that way to me. And so maybe by taking risks and being carefree on this very first day with everyone on this bike ride, I'm trying to prime the pump a little bit. I'm trying to get everyone like, hey, let's have fun and let's take risks. And I think that might have been part of it. And by it being cautious, it might subconsciously lead to everyone being too cautious socially, if that makes any sense. I could see that being a part of it because, that was on my mind. I wanted everyone to have a good time, and I know enough about group dynamics to know that how a group coalesces will determine the way it feels for everybody. And on that first day or those first few days, it was something that I wanted to try to work on. I didn't know how much control I would have over it, but it was on my mind. But again, not the major reason. Then I came to it. There's a part of me that hates how cautious that I have become lately. Afraid of getting sick, COVID. And, I got it. But I got it at the very end. Actually, I tested positive 2 days after the whole thing. But, the past number of years since COVID, and me and Stacy were very compliant with precautions and the social distancing and everything. I mean, partially because we were both working from home, but also because we're, particularly conscientious about a lot of things, including being a vector and getting long COVID and that kind of stuff. We take it pretty seriously. And I think being cautious and careful is important, but I think the pendulum for myself has swung too far for my comfort anyway. Also, after the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial and the content I made for that, the pendulum swung too far into the cautious zone there as well, where I was terrified of sticking my neck out, even kind of as a podcaster. Also, the more the podcast and the YouTube channel took off, the more I scaled back on my work to the point where me and my wife, basically our only income comes from the podcast and the YouTube channel, which is terrifying because, all my bills and if things don't go well, if things go south, if I get canceled or something, then I lose my home. I lose everything. Could Stacy and I find other work? Yeah. But it's unclear what that would look like. So I'm terrified. I look at the numbers a lot, and I'm pretty good at saving money for a rainy day. So I feel good about that. But it's scary. Whereas before, when I had a salary and a regular contract job at the university, at our university, we didn't really have tenure, but we had something akin to tenure, of which I had. And having that, that assuredness of that paycheck, it's just less worrisome. I worry about getting a complaint on my license and losing my license. Someone did complain on my license in a strange way. The licensing board didn't regard it because it was a ridiculous complaint. But it's worrisome to be on the internet just as a minor public figure. As I age, I'm worried about developing a major health complication. You get older and you start realizing how fragile everything is, and those kind of worries are there. I'm worried. I'm increasingly worried about not having the right supplies when I leave the house. Like before, I would just grab my wallet and my keys and walk out the door. Now it's like, okay, what if my phone runs out of juice? Got to bring the extra battery. Will I have enough water? What if I want a soda? Are the dogs okay? There's just a lot of caution, and probably for a good reason. But I think as I hopped on that bike, there was a youthful, carefree part of me that said, can we just for once just follow our nose and not worry about things? Can I just have some fun and not have to take so many goddamn precautions. It's a beautiful day. The pathway that we're on is wide and flat. There's no puddles or anything. Family's all here. It's a wonderful time. Maybe that's another part of it, was I had been planning this 60th redo for months, and maybe a part of me was just like, and as you know, that first day, I'm just like, okay, I got to make sure everything's going okay. I got to make sure that everyone. And then a part of me was just like, oh, can't I just sit back and enjoy my family and enjoy this time, you know? And that was the need I was trying to meet, was the need for spontaneity and freedom and getting out from underneath the thumb of constant precaution and carefulness. So I think that's what I was engaging in. Knowing this lesson that has been literally, or not literally, but close to literally drilled into my head, it gives me a way forward, which is, now I know that I need to attend to that part of me in a way that doesn't risk me doing a header off of a bike and breaking my neck. Hubris, arrogance, overconfidence, judiciousness, being overly cautious, flying too low to the sea, flying too high to the sun, finding balance. Let me know what you think, and take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.